And hello, welcome to the from the campus of Carnegie Mellon University. Let's start over again. Let's start that over. Good afternoon, everybody. From the campus of Carnegie Mellon University, we welcome you to the Software Engineering Institute's webinar series. Our presentation today is a security practitioner perspective on DevOps for building secure solutions. And as always, depending on your location, we wish you a good afternoon, a good morning, or a good evening. My name is Shane McGraw. I'll be your moderator for the presentation, and we want to make this as interactive as possible so you can address questions throughout the presentation today. And again, as much time as we have at the end, we'll take as many questions as we can. You can submit your questions to our event staff at any time through the chat window you can see on your console now, and I see a couple people chiming in, and also through the Ask a Questions tab on your control panel. So we will take questions in both of those places. We'll also ask a few polling questions throughout the presentation. And the first question we're going to ask today is just how you heard of today's event, and you will see that pop up on your screen now. Another three tabs I'd like to point out are the Download Materials, Twitter, and Survey tabs. The Download Materials tab has a copy of the presentation slides there now, along with other DevOps-related work from the SEI. For those of you using Twitter, you want to be sure to follow @cert_division and use the hashtag SEI webinar. And lastly, we request that you fill out the survey upon exiting today's event, as your feedback is always greatly appreciated. So now I'd like to introduce our two presenters for today. First, we have Hassan Yassar, the Technical Manager of the Secure Lifecycles Group in the CERT division of the SEI. Hassan leads an engineering group that focuses on software development processes and methodologies, specifically on DevOps and development. This group researches advanced image analysis, cloud technologies, and big data problems while providing expertise and guidance to SEI clients. Zane Lackey is the founder and chief security officer at Signal Sciences and serves on the advisory boards of the Internet Bug Bounty Program and the U.S. State Department-backed Open Technology Fund. Prior to Signal Sciences, Zane was the director of security engineering at ETSI and a senior security consultant at ISEC Security Partners. Hassan, Zane, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Hassan, all yours.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks for the introduction. I'm glad to be here and talking with Zane. He has a great expertise in this field. So what we're going to talk about today is basically covering up the DevOps development process and how really, as practitioner perspective, DevOps really help to include the security to build the secure applications and real-life examples. So this talk will have two sections, and in the first section will be more about the DevOps foundations, what DevOps means. I know there is a lot of definition of DevOps, depends on who are talking about it, and depends on organizations, or depends on who you're talking. So I would like to cover up the way of definition of DevOps, what we believe it is, and to include the security pieces. And second section will be more about the practitioner perspective, and Zane is going to talk about his real-life examples and how he achieved it in the security. So with that said, and what the DevOps means, and DevOps is really started the reaction. So reaction is about for the constant changes. So typical things as we know that as developers we are building something, and it seems it's okay for our end. When it goes to the real environment, there's a problem. Problems basically either house is burning or application is not working anymore, and there's some other big problems that we may see that. So basically, we know as the developers we know it's working, but the outside is not working. That's how it is started. So what is the definition of DevOps? It's a basic definition, and it's based on the Wikipedia. Bringing the development operational team together and emphasize communication, collaboration, integration between software developers or information technology. That's like the Wikipedia definition of DevOps. But what does really a DevOps in reality means? Like, is it only for Dev and Ops together, or is it beyond that? So let's talk about a little bit what's the typical application development process. So almost every organizations are doing the application development is agile methodologies. That's the very common terms, and that's the new the development process is very commonly used in almost every application development house or any software houses. So what Agile means about the constant iteration, the initial planning and deployment, which is a constant changes on requirement, analysis and design, and goes back to implementation, and get the feedback and go to plan, which is continuous evolvement throughout the application lifecycle. And however, when we do the more agiles in a strict organizations, and what about the silos? So in typical organizations, there are a lot of different groups in a software development house. There's a devs, there's a ops, there's a QA, there's analysts, there's a QA team. So name it. There's many other small, maybe other groups in a software development life cycles, which is actually as a silo in between. So in a enterprise scales, because there are many development teams, there are many operational teams, there's many QA and testing team, analysis teams are working together. In reality, they're all silos. Silo means even though they're in the same companies, maybe they are in the same building, maybe they're in the same floor, however, they are acting as their own team together. So even when you say like agile development methodologies, however, still they are siloed in between. So there's all block each other. So in the organization, if they are doing the waterfall approach, waterfall methodologies, in a siloed organization, it's forcing them to do more about the waterfall. What that means, like developer teams are doing the requirements, are doing design, are doing implementations, and however, they are doing more about the developer's sense. So when the developers are done with the requirements, are done with the design, are done with implementations, when they try to give the application to the QA engineer, which is creating another silo over there. So within the developer teams, maybe the team is doing the agile methodologies, which are doing the constant changes on requirements based on what the customer is asking about it, or changing the design, what the customer is looking for about it, and have an implementation plan. When it's transitioned to the QA engineers, creating another silo over there. So within that development team, it's all about agile methodologies, but outside the developers team, it's becoming more a waterfall approach, which is QA is taking that developers implementation, looking for other QA-related either compliance issues, looking for more testing, looking for securities, and looking for other typical testing as well. Then goes to the IT operations, which is more about the application deployment or production cycle, and other silos over there. So at the end of this process, it is becoming more about the water scrum fall approach. So we started for Agile within the development team, and at the end, it became a water scrum fall. So the business has its own siloed place as for more business-oriented. As a development team, we do all the Agile principles and development activities as part of daily Scrum, as part of changes. When it goes to the QA, it's falling basically. So our application development started good seams, and we developed it. When it comes to the releasing and QA, it is falling down, so it's becoming a problem. So what that means in terms of the DevOps world. So DevOps is basically extension of Agile thinking. As we covered a previous slide, and we said Agile is the constant changes. DevOps is more about the constant testing and delivery. So DevOps is taking the Agile concept, extending more about the operational life cycle. So getting more about operation teaming process. So in Agile, or as a development team, you are basically covering up more about development activities. And then when it comes to for implementation and bringing operational teams, so DevOps is coming in the pictures and making operational team or other stakeholder as part of that overall process. So that's how the DevOps definition, that what we believe as an SCI and a CMU here is based extension of Agile thinking and implementing, including other stakeholders, not only for operational team, whoever are part of this process as basically and covering up all the stakeholders together. So in general terms, and DevOps is basically covering up overall process, not only for operational team. So when I say not only for operational team, in application development life cycles, and there are many other components in the application development, which is the business analyst, and that might be a compliance people, that might be other people. So DevOps is requiring get everybody in that picture, not only for operation, everybody in pictures.
So you're going to see our second polling question, folks, should be on your screen now. And this is going to help guide this talk a little bit, but we want to know, does your organization follow DevOps processes and methodologies? And this will help tailor Zane and Hassan some of their comments they're going to make to see exactly who's in the audience. So take a second and vote now.
So while we're in that question, I would like to explain more about the stakeholders. So when I say stakeholder, I'm sure Zane, you have a lot of experience with the stakeholders, because one of the biggest problems is not getting the security folks into the stakeholder, I believe, just only for operational, but not getting the security practitioners in the application lifecycle, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that security is learning the same lessons early on that DevOps, the development and operation side of the house, learned of bringing the right stakeholders together. And we don't get as snazzy of an acronym on the security side of DevSecOps or SecDevOps or something like that, but it's really about bringing the key stakeholders together there.
So the definition is not only for us, it's beyond that. Whoever the part of the stakeholders, and then we'll go further. So what that means, actually, why we need other stakeholders into the process? Because every transition has risk. What is the risk is that means? So in application development, and we are starting from market analysis, right? So business analyst people are deciding what type of features that is required for that business. And based on analysis, what the analysis team or business analysis is defining the feature, that goes to the architecture and design team, which is more about the dev team. But if there's a problem in that transition stage, if the business analyst is not able to define what the business needs based on the architecture, based on designer, there's a consequence, there's a risk over there. Either architect or the designer has misunderstanding of the features, or the business analyst will not going to translate what the feature expectation and the architect will design properly. Then after designers, and then goes to developer side, developer will design, or developer will develop based on what architecture says, or the system designer says, including UI, including the security, including compliances. And there's another problem between siloed or architect design group and goes to developers, because developers are coding based on what they told to do, and what they told from the business analyst or the designers, what they're supposed to do, what they're supposed to write about it. But if they don't know exactly what architecture means, in a security perspective, they don't know what is the requirements, what the dependencies of that application, there's a fail over there. Then the developers develop an application or features, it goes to the quality assurances, right? And the quality assurances will test something against what? If there isn't a connectivity between all these groups, it will create a different type of test case scenarios. Maybe test case scenarios or the test are not going to give enough feedback for developers. If developers are getting a long, lengthy documentation about test results, there's a failure over there because developers may not have enough time to look for all these problems while they're coding about it. Then goes to the IT operations. In IT operations, they may not know enough to support the application for many reasons, like system architecture, maybe system design, some other components IT operation will don't know, or when they try to deploy in the production, and the production may not have that enough the maintenance cycles they can maintain it. So it's basically all about the constant. And going back to the agile means the constant transition. It's all about the constant transition. So constant transition, constant changes bring in more problem. It looks like bring more problem, right? So now we have constant changes. What are we going to do? The QA team has to do by themselves to change something, or the security team has to look for every time, and also the business analyst maybe have to go back and change again. So why is that important? It's requiring more about the collaboration. In this slide, like we typically when developers are creating a code, it is great, everything is great, and I'm writing a code, and I have to change, I'm able to do that. And the same to our operational team. It is doing good for the maintaining. It's good for the monitoring. When it becomes to more about the transition, what the developer did it goes to the operational side, production, which is managing and managing dependencies. That's the clash is starting. That's a problem starting. So it's creating it's basically creating more problem delivering the code to the operational team, or managing an environment, or managing other dependencies. So it's creating more problem in that regard. So to address that needs is basically DevOps is addressing all these pinpoints. Why it is important? Because DevOps, the main primary point of DevOps is promotes for the collaboration. It is requiring heavy collaboration between dev and ops team, including the collaboration between design architectures, including any environment network configurations, any deployment planning, any code review, it requires more collaborations. Instead of working at siloed environment, instead of looking for at then, instead of waiting something's going to come to my table, not actually, this requires more about the collaboration, what the DevOps says. What the DevOps methodology says, it is required more collaboration, because if we believe 100% if there is a more collaboration as early stage between business analyst, between designer, between environment network configuration folk, which is ops team, or release engineering team, or the code review team, it is important to have that type of collaboration. Collaboration is all talking about what we are expecting to be in my table, or what is my influence to develop something specifically on that piece of application or the modules. And it's also constantly open for communication channels too. So when we say collaboration, its other component is to have more collaboration through what? If you say collaboration through email, it may not work with the email, but should have all open communication channels open, like either bypassing through the cubics and talking to each other, or using the same project meetings, be part of the meetings, or using the similar environment like chat ops, or using some other tools and techniques. Everybody is visible to take a look. And everybody is visible, everybody is able to communicate each other. That's another thing. So when you say collaboration, we should have tools and techniques available to that. So DevOps is promoting about more tools and techniques and more communication throughout the team members. So specifically, it's engaging cross-functional team is needed to make a DevOps successful, which is requiring early involvement of expertise, early involvement expertise of operational team or security teams as a part of the process. And it's a complete engagement with other stakeholders, bringing engineers, bring consultants, bring other team members, experts together and work in the same problem, which break down organizational silos, enable more constant communication between other team members. So, what's the main goal of the DevOps to increase is, DevOps aims to increase more about innovation, and innovation is more about the people or developer are giving a contribution outside their tasking. In a waterfall method, if developers are spending more time or project meetings or more time for communications, if once they use the DevOps methodologies and process, they have more time for the innovations, which they can improve the quality of application. They can innovate some features in their time as more effective ways by working the project. Innovation is maybe specific to the security. Innovation may be specific to the features, but the goal is really increasing the innovation throughout the life cycle. Another key point is in really increasing more about the responsive to business needs, because of business needs able to give the result and early feedback throughout the life cycle. And then if the user is able to give the feedback as early as possible, which is creating more business impact and creating more response of the developers, because developers will see a business impact right away, getting the right feedback from the users and other stakeholders. And other things more about, we discussed the collaboration. Collaboration is another important thing, is increasing the all stakeholders team together. And then it is creating a more quality on the software. So quality is not only for functioning, on the like ability type of things, reliable extensibility. It is beyond that, including security, including compliance, and other components, other things stuff. So how we have to do, what is the other dimensions of DevOps? So mainly, there are 4 dimensions to DevOps. Like if you try to implement it, you have to touch the 4 main topics in DevOps. The one topic is more about the cultures. So the culture should be okay to implement DevOps. And when you say cultures, it is working together, and developer and operational team support release beyond the deployment, which is working more about the same business goals. And then they're requiring more about the process and practices. So basically, the DevOps pipeline should be streamlined. That has to be the components of the developed pipeline, including continuous delivery, including continuous integration, including test automation, script driven automated deployment, some provisioning tools, some self-service environment, which makes the DevOps enable as the process and practices. When we talk about the faster and quicker release, it is requiring more about the automation and measurement, right? So without having an automation, we cannot really release the application in a quicker and faster release. So we have automation in respect to the for testing, for building, for configuration, for any type of static analysis that we have to do, or we have to do more about the performance dashboard capabilities. It's a very crucial component for DevOps process implementation because, as we said, we should get an early feedback. To get early feedback, and all the manual process has to be done automated way. If we have automation, and if we're able to measure our success in terms of our defect rate, in terms of security, in terms of any vulnerabilities, if you're using any type of application, if you're able to measure it and back to our development cycle, makes more about the good improvement in terms of automation. Another important piece that application should be architected in a way that they can support an incremental release. If the application is a giant and not modular, there's no way to maybe implement the DevOps in a proper way because it's not going to be requiring to have the incremental release. The goal is have as the quick release as possible for small features, a small code base, then you can get early feedback on that code base instead of having a giant, big, large-scale application deployment. So within that full mindset, that means we should have a culture available in an organization, and we should have a process and practices that enable the culture alive. An application should be architected well and support the DevOps culture, and also the measurement automation is one of the key components to make that happen. So question is like, all right, how we can get it done? It is requiring more about integration. So now we cover up the culture, we cover up the tools. So the other aspect of development lifecycle has to be integrated. Now, if we are talking about more integration automation, that means our development pipeline has to be integrated. Like development pipeline means we should have a source control. Of course, everybody has source control, but not enough to have only source control. We should have other development pipeline activities should be part of together, like build server. So build server, you may use different type of tools like Jenkins or Bamboo or TeamSync as part of the CI server. But CI building server should not be only checking for your source control and then building the result. Should get enough feedback through the communication system. Like build server should be integrated communication system, maybe chatbots, maybe chats. And also build server can be part of issue tracking systems where developers are spending most of their time and getting the issues or any cases and writing code against it. And also if you have a code review system as part of the overall process, and when the developer are committing something to source control, should be a way to have the code review has been done, either pre-review or the static analysis, other part of it. So overall, all this component has to be integrated together. If it is isolated, if it is not integrated, again, we cannot have a DevOps implemented well. Even though we are implemented at the process level, but we should have enough support behind the scene as a tool perspective or the process perspective that makes things much easier to enable all these components. And same thing is monitoring systems, and same thing documentation system. Another important topic is as well, as with developers, we are developing a lot of stuff, a lot of components, and maybe writing a Word documents, maybe writing some other the user requirements. But if the documentation is more about the Word, and very difficult to communicate with developers in that sense. So that has to be some system or some ideas, which is DevOps is enabled as well. So use the same technologies or same tool set, or using maybe a text-based documentation makes everybody is able to utilize that needs and continue like that.
So we have a few audience questions, Hassan, if we can break in to take some of those. Edward wanted to know, what crossover lessons between Agile/DevOps and ITIL? How does DevOps apply to system administration?
It's a great question, actually. DevOps is really helping more about the system because I'm just going to go, in this slide actually a good example. In a system level, we are expecting to have the IT folks or operational team have the configuration management. So in the configuration management perspective, operational team are writing a bunch of script to provision their environments. And what the DevOps says, that provisioning script that operational teams are using it, that provisioning script can be part of development lifetime. So developer can use the same provisioning script and running a production-like environment as in their laptop or desktop while developing an application. That's the connectivities between the ops team to the dev team using the same tool stack and using the same provisioning tools as connecting the DevOps world to the operational team, which is the Agile. So Agile is not going to say that you have to use that mindset. Agile says you have to really transition or increment release. But when it comes to the how, and DevOps is going to answer the how question, DevOps will say, okay, here is the how you can do that. How you can do it, get the provisioning script from the operational team and then put into the development environment, which is the developer can use the same script. So ideally, again, another thing we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes, and security team, right? Security team, maybe they're going to have a blessed OS or sanitized OS. And sanitized OS is part of the operational team. They can provision it. Why don't we developer using the OS has been verified, has been patched already from early stage, from day number one? That's the connectivity that I can answer with.
Great. And then another one from Mario asking, in the context of SOX compliance, where a division of responsibilities is a requirement, parentheses, as I'm told, then how does a DevOps approach meet these requirements?
Yeah, that's another the misunderstanding. A lot of organizations are thinking that DevOps is buried because of compliances, but think about the compliance perspective. Compliance is looking for more about auditability, more about the visibilities. So in that integrated platform, if you have auditability and visibility throughout the application lifecycle, that's one of the requirements for SOX, and same thing for HIPAA, same thing for FISMA. In the perspective, like it doesn't mean that developers should not go into production, but however, you have a full auditability from beginning to end, all the requirements gathering, which is part of the SOX compliance, like you should have included, and who changed it, who wrote it, and then when is the test about it, when the test is done. So just to think about the moment, and you have a complete traceability from production, from starting from code level to production, or production back to the requirements gathering, which is SOX say that, and there's a full auditabilities. And separation of duties comes into a picture, who can touch it and where can they touch it. Maybe the code changes, maybe the for server changes. So SOX says developers cannot be accessible to production. That's perfectly fine. In DevOps mindset, we will use the same provisioning tools has been dedicated for developers, and developer use the same tool. Developer will not get access to production, but developer has access to the same tool set what operational teams are using it. In terms of the pipeline, so we have auditability. When it comes to audit, as DevOps is able to give an answer, how we can audit, how we can monitor, how can you make it visible, makes it much easier for audit perspective.
Great. We are caught up in the queue, so we can keep.
So as a continuation, actually, the segue for the more automated system, and DevOps is bringing more about automation, right? More automation is bringing the less human interaction, make the systems available, and rest of the other components, including security. As we know that the business is based on the quicker and faster releases. Once we have quicker and faster release, it is requiring more about automation. And then automation is using all integrated platform, because if you don't have an integrated platform, as we talked about the previous slide, if you don't have an integrated platform, you cannot make a full automation. Always make it automation. Idea is in a DevOps, if you are writing one script and stack 2 times, make it automated script, because you may use the 3rd time definitely. That's the mindset. If you are using it in security testing once, and then if you think you're going to do twice, make it automation test cases for that specific features. Then make it easier for including other components into the systems. And how can we improve the quality or innovation? Because if you take out the more manual process, make it more automation, so we can increase the more about the application developer time on focusing on writing a code. Like statistically, developers are spending more of their time for meetings, for other nonsense of project management things. If you take out that pieces, make it more visible to project managers, make it more visible to the operational team, all the stakeholders get the burden from developers, so developer will have more time for writing a code and increasing their coding time from 50%, maybe 75%. It's ideal case. If you do that, that will be a perfect to improving the innovation, improving the quality of that application developments. That's mainly for automation piece. So So far, we covered up the more DevOps and then fundamentals concepts. So I'm going to hand over to Zane. Zane is going to talk about more business and then secret solutions. So, Zane.
Hey, everyone. Please feel free to ask questions throughout here. I'm planning to talk through some of the lessons learned from my own experience here, and I'll jump into that in just a second. But I think certainly the best webinars or conversations I've been a part of are very interactive and very question-driven. So please jump in with those throughout.
And so we have a polling question just launched now, Zane, just asking, do you have security ops team as part of your development activity? So that's up. We keep on going, and we'll chime in with those results later.
Fantastic. Okay. And just kind of set the context here. So my what I'm going to kind of discuss here are the lessons learned I had building and leading the security program at Etsy during the time when it was really Etsy and Netflix that were pioneering a lot of what we're now calling DevOps and CI/CD and Agile and things like that. From a security perspective, I think and really from a broader DevOps perspective, I think that the world has really changed in kind of three fundamental ways. It means that DevOps and Agile and things like that code deployment is now trending to really near instantaneous, where in the waterfall world that we've all lived through, where we predicted our release cycles at every 6 or 12 or 18 months, now the world that we live in, code deployments can happen monthly or weekly or daily or hourly or even faster. The second is that, and this is really the existential crisis that security is going through right now, is that for the last 20 years, security has very much functioned as a gatekeeper in the sense that different parts of the engineering organization would kick things over the fence to security, and security would say no or change things or find vulnerabilities and kick that back to the teams and not allow things to ship until security approved them. But what's really changed out from under security is the velocity of DevOps and Agile and CI/CD means that in a lot of cases, security can just instantly be routed around. And so security has to shift from being this gatekeeper to actually enabling the rest of the organization to be secure by default and security self-sufficient. And it shifts from being a gatekeeper to really a service organization for the rest of the business. And that really ties into the third point here, which is that simply if security is a blocker, it will now be routed around. So these are kind of the three sections that I'm going to speak to very briefly. And again, please throw questions in throughout. We'd love to discuss them here.
So we actually do have a couple of questions. Just perfect. I'll just chime in back to the polling question to wrap it up. The question was, do you have a security operations team as a part of your development activities? It's 61% no. 61% no, 39% yes.
Great. Okay.
So then we had a question from Annette asking, this is not the case in my current environment, but wondering how one can change culture in an organization that has not supported collaboration but wants to move to this model.
Absolutely. That is, I think, the fundamental question that so many organizations are going through right now. I think that the technology shifts of DevOps, of Agile, of CI/CD, in a lot of ways are actually the easy part. The much more foundational question that so many organizations I talk to are going through right now is exactly your question. It's how do we start to shift our culture? And that is a tough problem. And to be honest, I think that the nice thing is many forces are actually pushing us in that direction. If it was just one, we'd actually probably be in trouble. But I think that from the business side and from the technology side, both sides are really trying to enable velocity. Right? There is not an organization on the planet that doesn't want to move faster. And these are really the technology approaches that are enabling us to start to do that. And whether certain organizations want to kind of resist the cultural change for a bit or others embrace it from day one, I really believe that the only reality that gets us to move quicker is to embrace those cultural changes. So I recognize that's a bit of a high-level answer to your question there, but I really feel that there are multiple forces at work pushing us at that, and I'd say that's the kind of global answer. The more local answer for whatever particular team you're working on is trying to think about how you can best interact with the rest of the organization and start to set examples there.
And another one from Deepak, maybe you're getting into this, but why is security not considered just another set of requirements on the system? Instead, it seems to be considered a separate discipline.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and I think that we are we really need to reverse that trend. That security has always been something that it's been kicked over the fence to at some point during the SDLC or anything like that, or the infrastructure process or anything there. The reality of the most modern, forward-thinking security teams on the planet today is that they didn't get very good at that. They got very good at enabling the rest of the organization to be security self-sufficient. That when a development group that they haven't even talked to uses their tools for the first time, security was involved with those in a way that the default and easiest way to use that tool set, whether it's infrastructure or code or anything like that, is the safest way to do it. And that then enables the rest of the organization to ask security when there are particular questions or things like that. And security is not spending 100% of their time simply fighting reactive fires. Okay, so moving on here to these kind of three sections. What do I mean when I say near instantaneous deployment? I'm going to give a technical example of the waterfall code model that we've all lived through here. So it'll be a highly technical diagram for all of us. Here it is. What we've always done is we have shoveled the code onto the bit wagon. The bit wagon forwards the QA river and then typically gets cholera in kind of the staging environment and never quite makes it to production. What is this actually shifting to? I'm going to give a few examples from my own time at Etsy, but this is not Etsy specific at all. This is really what you should replace Etsy in these slides with really modern organizations across the board and across industries. So when I landed inside Etsy, at the time, on my first day, they were doing 20 deploys to production a day. By the time I left, it was 50 and probably even closer to 100, which, as a security person, is a great way to have a heart attack on the first day of your new job. But what I really got to, and what I'm going to build to here, is the central thesis of this shift to DevOps and CI/CD and Agile and everything here is that it seems incredibly scary to security at first. The reality is it actually makes us safer. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. First, from the perspective of, what's really changing. And the first bit is that where we used to iterate in just development environments or QA environments, we now iterate live in production. So that's using techniques and approaches like feature flags and ramp ups and A/B testing. And to keep it brief, I'm not going to dive into all these, but basically A/B testing, for example, is where when you go visit a particular site, let's say you go visit Gmail, and suddenly it looks very different for you than it does for your colleague. What's going on there is typically they're conducting an A/B test that says, let's show this version of the site to 50% of our users and this version of the site to the other 50%. And let's see what drives more engagement and what people are happier with. And so what this means from a security perspective is that there might be multiple versions of your applications out there, either your applications or your infrastructure out there at any given time. And your security tooling that only hit one version of those sites, it might have completely missed every other part of your infrastructure or your applications. That obviously changes the way in which we think about security. So my face on day one of landing in this environment looked a lot like this, which is that this seems utterly terrifying to the way that we have done security for the last 20 years. Security is really typically viewed change and rate of change as the scary bit, that we want to slow down, we want to be able to review everything, we want to be able to sign off. The problem is that actually the opposite of that is true, that the ability to organizationally move quick actually is our number one security feature. And that took me a long time to learn. The biggest thing that I really realized as part of that is that vulnerabilities occur in our infrastructure, in our code, our applications, no matter what our development methodologies are. But, and for those of us who have lived through waterfall and lived through the processes of the last number of years, there is no such thing as an out-of-band patch anymore in continuous deployment or DevOps or anything like that. That, for those of us who have lived through it, is huge. Because in the waterfall world where you release every 18 months and a critical issue comes up, and that happens 3 months after the last release, organizationally, no one knows how to handle it. Typically the dirty secret that so many of us have really lived through is that involves paging everybody from your sysops to your QA teams, to your security teams, to your development teams, to tech leads across all of that, trying to get people in a war room and figure out how to fix this issue and how to get things out to production, and that typically goes on the order of weeks. Compare that to an environment where you're deploying, let's even just say once a day or once a week, and a critical issue comes up. You just do that deploy that day or that week. It is no longer a issue that the organization no longer culturally knows how to handle. When you're moving fast, it actually enables you to react to issues in the same speed as everything else there. I think a really strong comparison, and you'll note the bolded word on this slide of the former vendor at Etsy, was that we were working with one particular vendor at the time that had a critical security issue, but it could not have been more trivial in terms of ease to discover, ease to exploit, and ease to fix, thankfully. And we worked with that vendor at first, and it eventually escalated all the way to their CTO. And the response that we got back was, we will drop everything, we will rush this fix out, and it will go out in 6 weeks. And the problem is that was a one line of code fix, that was a trivial fix that would, in a kind of sane deployment environment, be fixed in 20 minutes. And really what I think is changing is the business expectation here, is that 10 years ago, this would be a fantastic answer 10 years ago, that, oh, you're going to be able to rush that out in 6 weeks. That's fantastic. I think what has changed is the business expectation to be able to respond to issues, whether that's a security issue, whether that's a performance issue, whether that's a reliability issue, that as we are embracing DevOps and everything as part of that, moving quicker means we can address issues even quicker. And so that actually lines us up for our next polling question here.
Okay, and that's going to be on your screen now. And we'd like to know, do you believe that the DevOps process, mainly continuous delivery, is a barrier for application security? Back to you, Zane, while they vote for that.
Great. So I will kind of talk to some of that point, actually, as we do the polling here. So we'll see if I'm doing a good job or not from the poll. My first real question as part of that was, okay, I start to believe why this can actually be safe, but what really makes it safe? In a single word, I would list that actually as visibility. It's the ability to monitor, it's the ability to have visibility, and ultimately, like I'll talk about in a minute here, it's the ability to provide feedback into your entire organization. I'm going to give you an example of that, of something that we would see at Etsy all the time here, was that providing visibility around the organization. And I think one of the real keys here that this photo doesn't actually capture very well is that in certain organizations in the past, you might see, hints of visibility and things like that. The problem typically was that was incredibly inwardly focused to only highly specialized teams. You might have certain Nagios alerts set up to only go to 2 sysops, something like that. And maybe that was on a dashboard somewhere. The real lesson learned about making DevOps safe and making this faster rate of change safer is that surfacing this visibility to the broader organization so that everyone in the organization really has this ability to receive feedback and the ability to monitor the system and get insight into the system. And so what I think this photo captures well is surfacing these metrics. What it doesn't quite capture, but what was really profound, is that this was in places around the organization that were incredibly high traffic, that were parts of the organization that were very cross-team, so it wasn't just only one team could see this. This was broad swaths of engineering, and even the business could see this. And then you would repeat these sort of dashboards and things like that around the organization. I think that security is slowly learning this sort of lesson that DevOps teams already had to learn over the course of the last 5 years. And I think DevOps teams learned that from other industries as well. This photo is a little bit dark here, but I think that the key is that we have been operating highly complex systems for much longer than we've been building applications and everything like that. And really, the more that we can learn from other industries that operate highly complex systems, absolutely the better. And so I think what this photo captures very well is that when you're flying a plane, which is a highly complex system, you want as much instrumentation into how that system is behaving as possible. And these lessons are they're slowly shifting to security. And this is something that I think security needs to step back from its own sort of echo chamber and really learn the lessons of the broader technology community of everything that we've been going through during this shift through DevOps.
I'll give you a practical example from the security side, which is, which of these is a faster way to spot an attack? A bunch of scrolling log lines or something like that, like just a bit of raw data that might be in one particular silo that only one team has access to, or organizational level visibility into attacks and anomalies that are happening in your system. I think the real key there and the real lesson learned that I've had, and the more that I've talked to my peers, the more that I've seen across the industry, is that you increase this agility by not surfacing visibility for just one or two specialized groups, but bringing that to the broader organization. You want to surface this visibility for everyone. And so that's really, I think, the same lesson from the DevOps side. The inverse of that is having to talk to security, and if security functions as this kind of isolated silo and gatekeeper, that causes delays. And the scary thing at first to realize, but what ultimately is beneficial to the entire business, is that in this shift to agility, delays get routed around. And so to really embrace agility, security has to decentralize. It has to enable teams to be security self-sufficient. It has to give them the tooling and the visibility, the monitoring, the feedback, so that they can have tighter feedback loops in their own infrastructure release and application release cycles. And security's focus should be, how can it bring these capabilities to the broader organization, rather than the reverse, which is how it's functioned for the last 20 years of a gatekeeper that signs off on everything and that slows the process down. And so I'd really say that the key lessons learned out of this are that embracing DevOps and Agile and continuous deployment, it seems very scary at first. If this is the first time that your organization is going through it, if you're coming from a security perspective, this seems incredibly scary. I've lived through that myself. Visibility becomes the key to moving quickly and safely. And I'd say that the real point here is that actually this bit that seems scary at first actually enables us to be more secure and be safer. And that in the general case, none of us for security teams are going to be able to hire enough staff or hire enough staff quickly enough. So what you really want to do, and the phrase is steal everyone else's, but really what you want to think about there is not how do you steal every other team, it's how do you empower every other team to really own the security of their own process.
So then I have a question to you. So when you talk about for monitoring things and then really giving them more feedback to the developers specific to what application they're writing and get the security results for the specific features, right? Developers will get an overall idea. That's the kind of like a contribution of security team for developers, because I see a lot of questions and an organization asking, we don't have enough staff members and security experts. We cannot get security every daily Scrum meetings and the project meetings. You're not assuming that you should be part of it, right? So how do you solve that problem in your IPSA cases? Like I'm sure you don't have enough staff members to go every meetings.
Yeah, I don't think any organization on the planet has enough security members to go to every meeting and everything like that. I think what security tries to focus on is twofold. It's one, it's building the culture that security is not going to function as a blocker and that security is approachable and there to help. And that building that culture and that trust, that team should be reaching out to security when they have questions. And security's part of the bargain is that they're going to help. They're not going to show up and say, stop all this, you can't release, you can't, spin up that infrastructure, but here's how you can do it safely. And the other real side of security's job is then to be working on the technical or process or even cultural bits that enable teams to really be able to do their job safe by default and really be security self-sufficient. And so those two tracks of building security so that culturally the organization reaches out when it needs to, and security trying to provide the technical capabilities and the cultural capabilities so that teams can actually be safe by default.
Right. I guess you made it through the visibilities and throughout the development pipeline fully integrated, correct?
Absolutely. I think that the visibility and the monitoring and the feedback really falls into that second bit, that the more you can provide visibility and monitoring and feedback to teams, the faster they can move and the more secure they can move quickly.
Great. So we got a number of questions in the queue. Just before we get to that, folks, I'll remind everybody that in the Download Materials tab, there are resources. The slides are available for download. We have a couple questions about those. Also, there is a Secure DevOps course that we're going to offer, a virtual course in January. January 11th, I believe, that there's information on that course within the console that you can download and walk away with. So a question from Mark wanting to know, does DevOps construct just break at scale in an organization with 1,500 applications, multiple CIOs and budgets, mostly made of buy applications and integrate efforts, and not straight line development to production? Does DevOps scale?
Yeah, so I'm certainly not going to say that it's easier in that environment, but I think that really the key tenet of DevOps actually lends itself very well to even that environment, which is that of decentralization. Right, a highly centralized environment and the push to centralization in that makes your job a lot more difficult in a lot of ways. The more that you can push down the feedback loops to the individual teams, the ability to monitor and have visibility, and the more that you can enable down at the team level, let alone even at the department or business unit level, the faster you can actually enable those teams to move and to really embrace DevOps at scale across the organization.
And I would like to add a couple other things, and there's a two question here, like DevOps can scale. Yes, absolutely. If you're able to scale the development process by manually doing SDLC programming technologies and methodologies, and DevOps is making more about automation, more about integrated platform, that makes it much easier to scale. How can we start? Basically starting from a prototype application and then use the same and the provisioning tools and similar integrated platform and scale it up to the many other developers and scaling up to the many other stakeholders, because it's going to give you a visibility throughout the life cycle because of it is all integrated. All machine does the work for you instead of person is doing the work for you. So as we said, and then visibility is a key point. So if you have a visibility throughout the multiple CIOs, multiple security operational team, so you can cover up their own pieces. Going back to the graph that Zane showed about the detection of the anomalies, so if you have the feature are checking for specific security sets, then you can define the dashboards and measurement by integrated platform, get the feedback for the specific development teams. Maybe they are not in the same continent, maybe in different countries, maybe different countries. It doesn't matter where they are, but they are getting a feedback specific to what they are developing. DevOps make that enable. In old days, in the current technologies, make it easier, but in old days, by manually, there's no way to do that. So what I'm saying, if we are scaling up as application development by not using tools, much easier with DevOps by using the tools and techniques and process. It is make enabler, basically.
Okay, Shushat would like to know, can you please name some of the most important DevOps tools that developers should learn or master?
I mean, there are many tools outside, like there is more than 180s. I don't want to give any specific tool name, but my main goal is whatever the tool has been picked, first of all, has to be compliant with your technology stack. If you are in a Windows shop, you cannot pick any other tools. May not going to work with your application. And then the other things also depends on your language. If you're using your languages, then pick the tools that is going to be compatible with your language. And also, if your architecture is more about the web architecture, look for the tools that's going to be as integrating your application, because you can get the early feedback. And whatever you pick the tools, they should be integrated to each other. That's number one thing. Doesn't matter which tools you choose it, as long as if the tools enable your life easier. Because that technically has to be connected. And then there's a way to the developer should be able to monitor the progress and changes throughout the life cycle. So every tool is able to do, but main goal is pick the tools based on your technology stack.
Okay, from Kevin, the concept seems to center around rapid deployment based on iterative builds with broad-based stakeholder involvement. If that is somewhat accurate, how does change management fit in? For example, how do you document RFCs, obtain internal approvals, and ultimately approval of a CAB without holding up rapid deployment?
I'm getting my feedback.
Yeah. I think that's a good question, and I think that a lot of I'm going to give kind of a high-level answer there because I think that the specifics actually they get unique to each organization. I think that what I've seen across industries from that perspective are that it's kind of similar to the way that security approached the problem, which was what worked several years ago doesn't actually work today, and that whether it's security or a CAB or sign off from 7 tech leads before a change happens, that has to iterate. Now, I don't say that those concepts go away. I say that they evolve, and that you might still have a CAB. It's that instead of it meeting every 3 weeks to discuss changes, that might become a standing thing in Slack or HipChat or a communications platform that occurs once a day. And so the same primitives are still there in terms of your organization. However, the actual execution and implementation of them adopts with this increase in velocity.
Okay, and we got one more question. I know we're at 4 o'clock, but I think it's a quick answer, hopefully, from Laura asking, any tips to implement DevOps when using open source software?
So I'll take that one. So for the open source software, it is good to have it as long as if you are monitoring what type of dependencies, libraries that has been used in your development pipeline. And in terms of security perspective, and you have to know, or somehow you have to evaluate what type of tools are using your development pipeline, or what type of tools open source you are getting into your application. If you are able to maintain that the list of open source libraries, and if there's a vulnerability, you should be able to go back and fix it easily, which is basically more about the supply chain related stuff. And as long as you're able to go fix it for any known vulnerabilities, that's good to have it. But the one lesson learned, don't trust every library out that is safe and secure. Do some due diligences first, and doing the basic security testing, get that open source libraries put into your production. Don't trust everything is secure. There's another thing is growing, is big demand. Use it, but be aware of what type of things you're using it and what type of things you're buying it. Like one of analogy is if you buy any grocery stuff, there's a recipe behind it, right? You know what is the ingredients. To the same analogy for any open source, look what is part of that open source library. What are dependencies? So don't be blindly taking in an open source and use it. Be smart and then look for what is ingredient, what is the dependencies of that libraries.
Hassan, Zane, thank you. Excellent presentation. Folks, thank you very much for your time today. There were a couple questions we didn't get to. For those of you using LinkedIn, be sure to search for our DevOps forum. You can post your questions there, and we ask that you continue the conversation there. And lastly, our next webinar will be November 29th, and the topic will be Emotionally Intelligent Machines by Satya Vanetti and Stephanie Rosenthal, and we hope to see you there. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
This concludes today's webcast. You may disconnect your lines at this time and have a great day.